front-ending your leadership stories. I shared last week how you would go about doing this and the importance of it. So if you'd like to know more, it'll be linked in the comments below. This week, I'd like to go into the benefits of front-ending your leadership stories. So front-ending assessment is something we do all the time in teaching, making sure we're looking at the assessment piece that is going to be given at the end of the unit and ensuring that the content that we're teaching through and the skills that we're teaching our students work together and they meet in the middle. And so I'd like to share with you 5 benefits to doing the same thing for your leadership stories to go into your selection criteria. All right. Hi, my name is Michelle Davis and I'm a teacher career coach. And I love working with aspiring leaders, so teachers who are ready to step out of the classroom and into school leadership roles. And the 5 benefits that I have for you today are just around, instead of waiting to the end of your project to write it up and put it into your stories ready to go and apply for a role, I'd love to take the idea and apply this from what we do in the classroom and do it into your leadership story. So write it before it's finished. And so I went through that a little bit last week. Today, I'd like to go through the 5 benefits. First up, data, data, data. Look, we are living in a time where leadership teams, executive leadership teams in schools are expecting us to make decisions based around data. And I know and I fully acknowledge, because I've been on the other end of it, where you're collecting data just for data's sake. And maybe nobody's even using it, but we've collected some information. And it doesn't really make a big impact on the school, even though this data is being collected. So keeping that in mind and knowing the workload that this puts on teachers, be mindful of your leadership story and the project that you're doing or the program, whatever it is, and keep that in mind when you're doing this. So what we're talking about for now is implementing some form of change, and you're trying to look for a start point, a middle point, and an end point, so you can show a pattern of improvement while this particular program or project has been put in place. And obviously it's going to revolve around student outcomes and staff as well. And so by front-ending these leadership stories and knowing your data, you're going to know what you want at the end of your story. So if you're looking for a increase in level of achievement, you're able then to track that level of achievement through your story and collect it as you go. The other one is that you're creating short-term data cycles. So if you're doing implementing a program, a reading program in a school, for say, and you want to get a gauge on how the students are going, you can collect little bits of formative assessment along the way to show that improvement. It's also so beneficial because at the end of the term, or the story's finished or the program's ended, you aren't scrambling to look for numbers and realizing, oh, I should have done that at the start and now I only have an end result, but there's no beginning result to know if that was actually an improvement. So the first benefit to front-ending your leadership story is definitely around collecting data that is meaningful and purposeful and doesn't overload your teachers. The next one is that you are putting yourself in solution mode and not problem mode. Because you've solved the problem, idealistically, yes, I know, but by writing it down at the beginning and then looking at it as you're going through the project, you know what you want to have happen. And so when there are bumps on the way, then you're able to go, okay, so I still want to end up here. Here is the problem that I have. How do I solve it so that I still end up with the kind of result that I want at the end? Rather than being in the problem mode, which is you don't know where you're going, you're kind of doing the project and you know why you're doing it, and you're sort of, I got an idea of what you want, but when a problem comes up, the problem becomes the big piece of the leadership story rather than the outcome at the end that you're actually trying to track. So benefit number 2 is that you're putting yourself into solution focus rather than a problem focus. And it's great practice for you being in a leadership role anyway, because no matter when you're in acting and you're in doing the permanent role, things are going to go wrong all the time. And so it just gives you a really good opportunity to learn how to still have the end goal in mind and knowing what you want and being able to work with whatever's coming up so that you are really into that solution. Number 3, if things go wrong, it's going to be really juicy for your story. And so what I mean by this is that when things go wrong and you've got a great plan and then staff member doesn't turn up to the meetings that you need to, so they're not engaging with the process that you're trying to put in place. Well, you've written it out as if it's perfect, but now you've got a problem. So now you get to show off your ability to work with a challenge in your leadership process, and you can put that into your story. That can go into your selection criteria because you're showing how that you can pivot at any point to be able to really get a good outcome at the end. It can show that you are able to think on your feet. And I'm sure that any school would love a leader who can think on their feet rather than somebody who makes a plan and the whole universe must follow that plan because they made a plan. And so the other part that is really wonderfully juicy about having things go a little bit wrong is that it shows that it's not the you story. It's not the Michelle story in my case. It shows that I'm being a leader because being a leader is influencing those around you, but you're doing it for a purpose and a cause, and it's not about you. It's about somebody else and a problem you're trying to solve. And by showing that there was a problem, you're then able to demonstrate how you were able to bring them on board or stop the process or get more information or pivot slightly. And wouldn't that be so wonderful for your story? Number 4, it will show you where you have any limiting beliefs. Look, leadership is a very big personal journey within a professional context. And so if you're putting yourself out there and you're trying to be responsible for a team, it's about you being able to lead for your people. And it can be quite confronting because you've lost the 4 walls that were your classroom as a teacher, and the 4 walls have now dropped away. You now have an entire school that you're working with. Yes, there is, a group of teachers, but instead of students in front of you, you are now working with peers. Well, they used to be peers, and now you're starting to step into that leadership position. And so this can turn up that limiting belief that you are holding yourself back, or things aren't going as you want them to, or it's making you be seen. It can look a little something like this. Maybe you are trying to organize to meet with somebody and you just don't seem to ever put it at the top of your list, although you know it's going to make a big difference in your leadership story. Another one is you go to write an email and then you go, you know what? It'd be better to have a conversation. And so you stop writing the email, but then you never go back and actually book in a time and a place with that person to have a conversation. And so that thing that's super duper important that would help your project doesn't end up happening. Perhaps you are doing lots of easy things and you're ticking off your list, but you're doing it all behind the scenes and you're not trying to annoy anybody or interrupt any of your peers because it's my project and I'm kind of putting something on them and I'm very mindful of it. So I'm going to do all the busy stuff at the background. It can look like spending lots of time making a document super duper perfect and gorgeous, but it isn't actually usable by anyone because it's the way it's presented or the way it's written is very much in your language and not in usable language for other people because no one's ever given you feedback on it. And it can look like when things go wrong, you're blaming other people. And so by putting some of these things up in front of you and telling you by writing your leadership story up front, the benefit is you're going to find your limiting belief. Because when you find what's holding you back, you're then able to look at it squarely in the eye and start to reframe it. And so that's something you can look into, or you can reach out and have a chat with me. And the 5th one is that energetically, you are telling the universe, I am ready for a leadership position. If you front end your leadership story, so it's written out all perfect, ready to roll, and you've started to get the beginning going, imagine that energy you're putting out and that shift in perspective in you is that you're really putting yourself into a position where if something came up, you could be ready to go. And you watch when you put the energy out there, how the universe will come and meet you. All right, so I gave you 5 benefits today of why you would want to front end your leadership story. So number 1, data, data, data. Number 2, it puts you in solution mode and not problem mode. Number 3, when things go wrong, you get really juicy stuff to add to your leadership story. Number 4, it will bring up any limiting beliefs that you have, beliefs that are holding you back as a leader, and then you're able to look them squarely in the eye and start to work through them. And number 5, energetically, you watch those opportunities come your direction. So front-ending your leadership story, so that you can put it into your selection criteria is a really solid strategy for people who are transitioning from the classroom into leadership roles. Rather than waiting for things to happen, you plan it out and you dream big, because then you watch the inspired action that you're going to be able to take. Start with the end in mind. We do it as teachers. Let's put it into practice as a leader. And it's going to be able to show all those leadership abilities and skills that you need to practice on a small scale with your project, because you know where you want it to go and you know how you want it to be. And then you get to be in the position where you are driving that and making that change in your school for the betterment of your teachers and the betterment of your students.